Hey everybody. Yeah, somebody Jtresses over on YouTube asked me to do a video response to a topic he's done here at the Saturday Morning Sonic Forums, and I'll provide the link down below. But the title of his topic is Archie Sonic Changes. Don't blame me and Flynn. And this is what he had to say 2 days ago. And I apologize if I didn't read about this sooner. I've been working with my brother-in-law on his with his pressure washing business. But this is what Jay Therese had to say about 2 days ago. And let me see if it shows the time he did this. Um, did this 2 days ago, 2.5 days ago actually, at about don't think about 9 o'clock at night, around 9:38 at night. But this is what he had to say two days ago. This is what he had to say, and I quote: "So with the Archie Sonic series going through changes, Archie Sonic purists aren't happy. Whether they're making the comic more like the games, the redesigns, or the fact that many characters we grew to love are gone, I can understand both sides of the situation. Some of these changes may not please people, including me, but at the same time, we can't really do anything about it. All I ask is one thing: don't blame Ian Flynn. The man is not the reasons for these problems. He's just trying to do his job, and a lot of people are blaming him for it. The main reasons for these changes are the Penders versus Archie lawsuit and Sega mandates." And then he asked the question, "So what do you not like about the changes and why?" And he's got some good responses lately. One person called Red Author responds by saying that most are to do or most are due to the legal debate and not to please fans. He says, Red Author, in response, he's the first replier to this. He says, "I feel the fans lost out more than anyone in the debate because Archie Comics didn't want to fight/pay." Then another person responds after that called Prince by Tor, and they say, "I completely agree, but when has Sega really paid attention to the fans instead of their revenue stream?" Uncle Ben says Sonic 4, responds by saying Sonic 4 per se. And and then he continues on in his response, being the third responder. He says, "I'm not 100% blaming Ian Flynn. He gets about 33% of it. The other 66% is the editors, Archie, Pender's lawsuit, and Sega." Now, Jay Therese, the original poster, the OTPer, says he'll miss some of the Ken Pender's characters, mostly Julie Sue. By Thor, excuse me, Prince by Thor's second response is, "Well, I don't really blame Ian Flynn for all the changes. I think at some of the time his direction is very poor in my opinion. It would really clear it up if Sega or Archie would just let the fans know what all of their edicts are. However, if all the fan base knew these restrictions, people might stop reading altogether. Truthfully, I can't say I'll miss much since the characters I like are still in the comic, and Mobius, or whatever they're calling it now, has been screwed up for quite some time now. I don't know, perhaps I could say I will miss its uniqueness of the comic in comparison to the rest of the cesspit that is Sega's version of Sonic, and of course a few of the characters. I think I said it before. I have very low hopes for the comic, but I'm taking note, and if it gets better, I might actually start buying it." And that's the second reply by Prince by Tor. And then Rob the First replies by saying this. Rob the First replies, "Hey guys, I've been talking with Ian Flynn since a week ago. And here's the conversation we had. And this is what. Okay, now this is Robbie the First's conversation with Ian Flynn. This is Robbie conversation. This is what he said to Ian, and I quote, "Hi, the name is Grant, and I used to read the Sonic Archie comics back then, and I heard rumors about the changes you're doing. And I know you have a lot of messages out there. And I know you have a lot of messages here or not. And I'm sure some people ask you same questions, like when will Julie Sue, Hershey, and the others made from Ken Penders will return. And I just heard rumors that Ken Penders said it's okay if your company can use one of his characters. What he said, and he quotes Ken Penders, by saying that Penders says that Archie has the ability to go forward with these characters if they choose so. Then Rob the First mentions that he doesn't know if Ken Penders means it. He asks Ian, do you trust him on that? And then he asks at the end, if Julie Sue won't appear in the Archie comics no more, who will replace Knuckles' girlfriend? If no, then will she ever return to the comics? Just asking. And that was Rob the First. That was the start of Rob the First's conversation with Ian Flynn. Here's Ian Flynn's response, his first response. And I quote, Rob the First, Grant, I've been asked not to comment on what can and can't be used in the future of the comic. Mr. Pender's statement is misleading. By the same token, you can walk into any restaurant and eat whatever you want. The unspoken implication is you have to pay. Additionally, Mr. Penders has publicly stated he'd want editorial control over the material he created. Now here's Rob the First reply to that to Ian Flynn. Here's Rob the First. He says, "Yeah, I understand it's your rules. I guess I'll have to see which character is coming back or not in the upcoming comics. And yeah, I have a feeling that Ken Pender's statement was somewhat misguided. I feel bad, and like everybody else that Ken tried to almost ruin the Sonic Archie comics. While I may not know him, is he always selfish to you? By the way, if you ask Ken or anyone else for permission for those characters, how much will it cost you if you use them for your comics or television series? Just asking." And then this is Ian Flynn's last reply. Ian Flynn says, "I don't know what his licensing fee is, nor is it my decision. It's all out of my hands." And then Rob goes on to tell us in his reply to Jtresses' topic. So there you have it. He's not allowed to tell me if some of the characters made from Ken is coming back or not. But he said that Ken stated his editorial or started or state. But he said that Ken started his editorial control of his characters. So in my view, I don't think they're coming back, or maybe they will. I don't know. Now Prince by Tor responds to that by saying thanks, and that it really sucks. That it really sucks. Prince by Tor says, "It looks like Ken Penders did more damage than we thought. Well, I've always felt bad that the Freedom Fighters have flat out been ignored by Sega. It's far worse how basically Penders characters are more or less orphans now. I only wonder why Flynn is not allowed to use Mobius anymore. It predated Penders' involvement with the comic, and has even been used, I believe, in Sonic Spinball. There must be something else going on for that one." And then he asked the question, "I also wonder if FUS, not FSU, I'm thinking Florida State. He says, "I also wonder if FUS, Fans United for SATIM /season, will have any issues if they decide to use one of Pender's characters." And basically, this got a lot of responses here by a lot of people. I think the main thing a lot of people are upset about is just the way these changes have come about. Matter of fact, I'm looking at E122 PSI's reply in response to the topic. And this is what they said. This is what E122 PSI said. This is what E122 PSI said, and I quote in their reply: "I don't blame Ian Flynn's team for the changes. I blame them for the lackluster execution of said changes. Mecha Sally's arc was just on a loop. Most of the Penders characters are forgettable, and I didn't like most of the designs they were using at that point anyway. However, they still set about solving these things in a manner that actually managed to make it worse. In cases such as photo redesigns, I mean, proto, as some proto redesigns, actually decided to forego methods that could actually make it better." And then here's Furry Kef responding to Prince by Tor's question of why Flynn is not allowed to use Mobius. Furry Kef says, "Probably because all the other Sonic continuities take place on Earth or some form thereof. So, okay, let me repeat myself. This is Furry Kef in their response to the topic, and their response to the question that Prince by Tor had of why Flynn is not allowed to use Mobius anymore. And this is what Furry Kef says. Furry Kef says, probably because all the Sonic continuities take place on Earth or some form thereof. So calling it Mobius makes the Archie continuity stick out like a sore thumb these days." And then they use, and you'll be able to scan down when you look on the first page of this topic here. They scan down, when you look at Furry Kef's reply, they added a picture from 124, at the end of 124, which was in June of 2003, 10 years ago, over 10 years ago. The final page, the final panel that everybody knows, is Sally walking in saying she's got news, bad news, and that she says that the Zorda are right. Mobius and Earth are really the same planet. And that was from the two-part 124-125 anniversary story, Sonic Adventure 2.5 Alpha/Omega. Now, Lewis the Hedgehog, or LTH, responds by saying, "I don't blame Ian Flynn completely, but I'm not about to let him off the hook yet. I know things are bad, but why do they have to stay that way? Who is to say things won't change for the better later? Sure, you and I cannot do much, but we all together could create a snowballing effect. The only thing is money, right? If enough of an uproar is made, and it nearly is right now, the publishers would be worried about revenues and rethink the strategy. Also, what will happen when Penders loses his lawsuit with Sega and EA?" And again, you got a lot of other responses. You have one person that says Archie's been the only active continuity other than the games for quite some time now, and it's already distinct, and it already is quite distinct from the game continuity. Given that so many of the characters, many of them major, are not in the games, as long as characters like the Freedom Fighters are in the comic, it will never mesh with the game continuity. Getting rid of Mobius, therefore, doesn't accomplish much in that regard. It does, however, potentially alienate older fans who grew up with the term. It was a fun bit of nostalgia that wasn't doing any harm, and its loss in official media feels like one of the final death kneels of the old Western canon. And then another person replies by saying, "No, the death knell to Sega. It's people like Bytor, the classic fans that made Sonic as popular as he is today, and now Sega is spitting on their childhood icons with pointless revisionism. Let's face it, Sonic's fan base is mostly adult now. Little kids are too busy playing COD or GTA, Call of Duty, and Grand Theft Auto, because their parents don't know nor care any better. Sonic is for the teens, 20-somethings and older. Sega was trying to appeal to the crowd years ago anyways. It's all wallets that keep the hearts beating. They better respect that fact. And then this another person says that while the Sonic fan base across the internet perhaps skews towards older demographics, especially on sites like this, Sonic Fans United for SatAM, they say, I'm fairly sure that the bulk of sales for both the comics and the games are from children. People like you and I are part of a niche group, one that from a financial standpoint is rather insignificant. Sonic's always been aimed primarily at kids. We're just kids that grew up and gradually found ourselves outside that target demographic. It's frustrating, and I feel Sega has increasingly lost sight of making the series appeal to a wider age range as it did in the early 90s. But as long as Sonic remains popular among children, our own support of our But as long as Sonic remains popular among children, of our own support honestly means little. That said, I imagine that older fans make up a greater portion of the comics audience than in the case of the games. So it's probably that backlash from the recent series of events and will nevertheless have a appealable effect on sales. And then, of course, we have another page. Red Author responds back, and I'm trying to see what he says. In Red Author, he starts on the second page of this by saying, so true, many of the older target audience grew up and expect more from the series. However, that's the double-ended sword. Many newer generations of fans are turning away because too many older gen fans are saying the newer games aren't good because they aren't like they used to be. Same with the comics. The people who review them are usually older fans who don't like the current direction. The newer generation of fans, who are the targeted audience, always turn away because the old gen advises them too. Sega and Archie can't appease both, so they're leaning towards hoping the new game fans will catch on to the comics if they make them more like the games. Also, since all the older generation does is complaining more, mayhaps Archie and Sega don't feel they should even waste their time appeasing them anymore. And again, you got more topics, and I don't want to read them all because it's going to take too long. But basically, yeah, it's like I said in the video yesterday, and because Uncle Ben here on the Fans United for SatAM site, UB basically asked that question of who's to blame, and again, Sega does take a majority of the responsibility. Like I said yesterday, I understand that, Sonic is the mascot. He's the bread and butter. He's what puts food on their table at times. I get that. But here's the thing. What they should do is they need to kind of do some research. They need to say, okay, they need to kind of do research and go like, okay, what's popular with a certain demographic when it comes to Sonic? And I guarantee if they do their research and they realize, oh, the games are more popular with the kids, so let's aim the games at the younger generation. And then when they see the comic sales being, the comic sales and all that, and find out that the comic sales are being, that the sales of the comics are being or the reason for the sales, the increase, if you will, in sales when it comes to subscriptions and the in-store sales of the comic, that if they do research, they will see that the older demographic is the main demographic responsible for those sales. So the increase in sales on subscriptions, in-store sales, and all that. I guarantee if they do research and they see that trend, that they see that the games are more towards the kids demographic and the comics are towards that older demographic, perhaps maybe Sega will realize, oh, well, maybe we should just let the comics be their own continuity again. I mean, I understand they're doing whatever it takes. I understand they're doing whatever it takes to get a lot of revenue, a lot of money focused onto the comics, because right now, you know, they've got games coming out. They do. They just had Sonic Lost World come out, but here's something about Sonic Lost World. Sonic Lost World got a mixed reaction. It did. It got a mixed reaction. And yes, when you look at some of the cutscenes that people have posted on various video sites, you'll see that it's kind of like it's a little dark for a Sonic game, especially on Nintendo. It's a little dark at times. When you look at the cutscenes, it gives you the impression that the game's kind of dark. And that the robotization, if you will, or the roboticizing in the game is more like legionization, if you know what I mean. So that kind of gives you an idea of what roboticization is now in this new continuity of the comics. You look at Lost World, it gives you the idea that roboticizing is just the newer term of legionization. But again, it got a mixed reaction. According to some of the ratings, it kind of got like basically the highest it got was like a 6 out of 10, if not 5.5 out of 10. That's what it got. And for it to get that kind of a rating is kind of surprising. But again, the game hasn't come out here in the U.S. yet. Sorry about that. I had to uncover the bird. He was making some noise. But like I said, the game hadn't come out here in the U.S. yet, and that's just from sales in Europe, Australia, and other places in the world. We don't know what the reaction is going to be here on the Western side of things. But if it's getting a mixed reaction so far, with a mixed review and rating of a 5.5 out of 10, mostly a 6 out of 10, that's not a good sign. Yes, it's dark for a Sonic game. Don't get me wrong. It's not the darkest. Believe me, that title belongs to Shadow the Hedgehog, but it's pretty dark. But basically, we had seen this before. We had seen this kind of story before, where, you know, the life energy is drained out of people, and when it's drained out of people, the characters end up, you know, after they have the life energy taken out of them, they end up dead temporarily or something. So, but again, it's because I think they'd seen this story before that I think is the reason for the mixed reaction. And I think also it's the fact that when they look at the gameplay looks decent. Don't get me wrong. I haven't played the game. I have not played the game yet because honestly I don't own a Wii U. But to me, you know, the gameplay from what I've seen on videos looks pretty decent. But here's the thing. I think part of the mixed reaction to Sonic Lost World is not just because we had seen this kind of a story before, but also because the gameplay seems so similar in many ways to the Super Mario Galaxy. You see, the one thing that Sonic fans always look at is they always look at Sonic having a distinct look, having not just have a distinct look and being different than Mario in many ways, or in certain ways, but having a distinct gameplay style and not being similar to other gameplay styles of the past. You know, when you look at a title like Sonic Lost World, and hold on for a second. But when you take a look at a title like Sonic Lost World, you expect something different. Sorry about that. I had to put the bird in the far room because he's making too much noise. But anyway, like I was saying, when when you create when people see a title for a game called Lost World, especially and it's tied to Sonic, they expect something different. They don't expect something similar in gameplay almost of Mario Galaxy. They don't expect a story through cutscenes to be similar to what we had seen beforehand. So, again though, basically, with games like Sonic Lost World and basically through the cutscenes I've seen and stuff, finding out that roboticization is basically like legionization, that kind of gives you an idea of what roboticization is going to be in the comics. And I can understand, again, I can kind of understand why they want to, and I can understand why Sega would want to tie it together. But again, what they need to do, if I'm Sega of America, or I'm Sega of Japan, or I'm just the entire worldwide Sega Corporation, if I'm them, I do my research. I do focal groups. I do some focal groups. I do some research. And I find out what demographic sells in each category Sonic's involved in. And if I see that the games, the demographic that plays and buys the games, mostly a younger generation, like today, or in the past 5 to 10 years, or whatever, then I'm going to target that audience with the games. I'm going to say, okay, the game sales are up because of this demographic. What about the comics? Take a look at the comics, and you see that the demographic responsible for a majority of the sales and stuff, like I mentioned earlier, is an older demographic that basically grew up with Sonic since the very first day he debuted. So my research would tell me, okay, let's have the comics targeted more towards them and give them what they want. You see, I think that's what they need to do. That's what I think they need to do. But again, I understand. But again, as much as I hate to say this, I understand why they would do it. They got Sonic Lost World out. They're gonna have Mario and Sonic coming up soon, with another Olympic game in the series. But in between regular Sonic games, I can understand, and I hate to say this, I can understand why they're doing it, because they want to make sure there's no disconnection between both continuities. But I will say that Ian Flynn does not need to take a lot of the blame. I mean, like I said, Sega's the ones that are licensing the character and the franchise to Archie Comics to do a comic book series about, a very successful one that's ran for over 20 years. That's ran for 20 years now, and has published over 250 issues. Has published various spin-offs, including one that's gone over 50 issues. Published various graphic novels, archives, you name it. So I can understand where they're coming. So I can understand where they don't want to lose that connection. They don't want to, I guess, confuse fans or anything. But yeah, I do think that Sega needs to take a lot of the blame. I think the whole Pender situation is part of the blame. I will say that. I'm not afraid to say that. And I think, again, if I'm Sega and along with Archie, I need to do a few things to, get the people back on my side. I need to go and do focal groups, and find out exactly what focal groups and research and find out what demographics sell certain parts of Sonic or appealing to certain, and find out what parts of the Sonic franchise are appealing to certain demographics. And find out sales-wise what certain demographics geared towards certain areas of Sonic. And that's what I would do. And I'm not a salesperson. I'm not a person that goes by the numbers. I'm not somebody that says, "Oh, here's the sales for this quarter, sir." I'm not that kind of a person. But as a fan, I can almost believe that if they did something like that, they would see that the sales, the revenue that comes in for the comic is mostly because of an older demographic, a demographic that grew up with the character since he first started. So again, I can understand where fans are coming from. When some of them say, "Don't blame Ian Flynn." Don't blame him. It's not his fault for the changes, and I agree. It's not completely his fault, but there are some things he should have been aware of. If anything, if I was Ian Flynn, I should have done something that would get me in the know, that let me kind of figure out what was going to happen in the future, what was going on behind the scenes, and how it was going to affect my work. That's what I would do. I wouldn't hide it from people. I wouldn't hide it. I wouldn't have it hidden from me. I wouldn't have it hidden from me, and then all of a sudden, whenever they felt like it, come out and say, "By the way, Ian, you're going to have to change this, and you're going to have to change that, and blah, 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 blah." Now, I would want to know what the heck's going on. I would. But again, I believe Sega does need to take a lot of the responsibility. And yet, the Penders lawsuit is not that far behind. It's not that far behind. And from what I understand, as far as Penders goes, it's like he's saying, they could still use my characters, but then when you contract that with what Ian Flynn said to Rob the First, he's basically saying, Ken said we could use his characters, but he wants editorial control. In other words, it sounds like if Archie Comics says, "Okay, we want to bring Julie Sue back in," Ken Penders is going to want to be in control of that situation from an editorial standpoint. He's going to be like, no. Julie Sue needs to do this and that, whether you like it or not. And that's how it should be done. I think that's what Ian Flynn's pointing at. And I've always been a firm believer as a fan that I think there's more to this whole thing with Ken Penders than just suing over his characters. I truly believe there's been more to this than just Ken Penders suing over his characters. You want to know what it is? You want to know what truly I think it always has been? I think Ken Penders has been upset that a couple of years ago, and even if you would have asked Ian Flynn last year, and even earlier this year, that basically, I believe, this is my opinion as a fan, I believe Ken Penders got upset at the fact that you had Ian Flynn, the new head writer, and several other people come out and say, "Oh, by the way, Mobius 25 years later, MY25L, or MYL, Mobius years later, that's not really canon. That's kind of an alternate, kind of off-the-page kind of deal. That's not really canon. That's, it's more of a what-if kind of scenario. It's not the official canon. It's not part of the official continuity." And that's what I think triggered something. That's what I believe triggered something within him to go and do this, because it's like, wait a minute. Because think about it. I'm not trying to play devil's advocate or anything. I'm not trying to, and I'm not trying to take sides here. But I think, from a business standpoint, If I'm Ken Penders and I'm thinking, oh, what I wrote in the comics is going to stay as part of the comics continuity no matter what. Nothing's going to change. And one of my most favorable writings, one of the things I liked writing the most about was the future storyline. And when I write it and I say, oh yeah, the future is part of the continuity, it's the true part, it's all true, it's part of the continuity. When I'm sitting at home now, a free agent, if you will, a freelance writer, a free agent, working on my own stuff, and I hear through the grapevine that Ian Flynn and several others at Archie Comics are saying, oh yeah, Mobius years later, that's not true. That's not part of the true continuity. That's just a what-if scenario. Of course I'd be pissed. And maybe he took action because of that. He's like, okay, you don't want to make them continuity? You don't want to make them a true part of the continuity? Fine. If you don't want to do that with my stories, you don't want to do that with my characters, fine. I'm just going to take them back. And I believe that's what he did. In my opinion, I believe, in my opinion, that's what he did, or at least it's one of the things that triggered him to file the lawsuit. It's like if they would only say, "Oh yeah, Mobius years later is a true part of the continuity." Everything that does take place, that's portrayed in this future, is what's going to happen. I think that's what triggered something within him. I think it did. But then again, on the other side of things, you could also see where Ian Flynn and a lot of them came from. They're like, well, we can't do Mobius years later, they look at Mobius years later and they're thinking, we can't let this be the true part of the continuity. We can't let this be the actual future because people are going to know. It's going to be like spoiling people. We need to make it like a what-if scenario. And that's what they did, and that's what he did. I mean, I'm sure Ian Flynn liked Mobius years later, but I think he liked it more as a what-ifs kind of scenario. I think that's what he liked. He liked it as more of a what-if scenario. Now, you might say, well, wait a minute. They did a whole Sonic Universe arc on this. Silver showed up. Who's to say it's not continuity? Again, it's a what-if. Just because what Silver saw could be the future doesn't mean it is. And again, my honest opinion is I think that's what kind of helped trigger that whole thing with Ken Penders filing a lawsuit, and vice versa. That's what I think. But again, I do agree with Jtresses. We cannot put the entire blame on Ian Flynn. The blame has to be shared by those that not only license out the franchise to said comic book company, but by said comic book company as well. They need to both take the blame, a share of the blame, and a majority of that blame also has to go to that lawsuit for screwing things up. But again, Sega and Archie are kind of like at the top of that list of being the ones that share the blame, because Archie Comics should have at least informed Ian what was going on, given him more details, and given him an idea of what was going to happen. Because if I'm Ian Flynn and I'm writing a comic and I'm writing it the way I'm thinking it's going to go, and especially if it's a major arc that I'm working on, that I want to make my masterpiece, I want to make my I want to make my mark with, if you will, that's going to define my run with this comic. If I'm working hard, typing on my computer, maybe at times using my iPad or my tablet or my laptop to continuously work on it no matter where I'm at. If I'm doing that and all of a sudden I get word, oh, by the way, things have to change because of this, I'm going to be thoroughly pissed. Because no one would have told me. No one would have had me prepared. If they would have had me prepared, if they would have had Ian Flynn prepared, if I was Ian Flynn, if they would have had someone like me prepared for a situation like that, I could have taken time to type up one. I know it would have been a little bit more time, but I would have taken my time to write up one scenario, which would have been the original way I wanted to go, the director's cut, if you will, as well as the alternate scenario, the way that eventually things went. That's what I would have done. That's what I would have done if I'd been informed ahead of time. But no one at Archie informed him of what was really going on. And when they do, they say, oh, by the way, you can't really say much to anybody if anybody asks you questions. What does Archie Comics expect? People are going to, fans, older fans, younger fans, they're going to want to know what the blank is going on. They are. But again, I do agree that you can't entirely blame Ian Flynn. Yes, he did leave people out on a loop when it came to his old Mecha Sally World Tour 2 Death Egg Mark II story arc. I will give it that. He did leave us out. He didn't give us a proper conclusion. Not saying he won't, but he didn't give us a real proper conclusion. It's like, okay, here comes the third Genesis waves. Hey, whoop! There it goes. And fourth Genesis wave, whoop! Guess what? Now we're in an alternate world. Now you're back in your world, but things have been alternated. Things have been changed. You know, it's like fans, it's like, it's like I understand fans want to put the partial blame on him because of things like that, and that's fine. But again, I do agree, you can't entirely blame him. You can't blame him for most of everything that's happened because he's out of his hands. But I do agree he should have been at least informed in some way. But that's all I'm going to say. And Jtresses, I hope you've enjoyed this video response to it. And I'll provide a link, ladies and gentlemen, to his topic at the Forums United for SatAM site, which is sonicsatam.com. And I will talk to you all later. God bless. Take care. And comments are welcome.